Rain didn't fall that night so much as it attacked. Hard, slanted sheets that turned the streetlights into blurred halos, and the world into one long hiss of water. Mira stood under the narrow awning of her family's townhouse for 3 heartbeats after the door slammed, as if her body refused to believe it had just been shut out of the only place it had ever called home. The brass handle was cold when she touched it again. The lock didn't give. From inside, she heard her mother's voice, sharp as broken glass, not loud, worse, controlled. "Go, we've done enough." Mira's throat tightened. "Mom, please, it's not what you think. I didn't—" "You did," her father cut in from deeper in the house. His voice was steady, like a judge reading a sentence. "You brought shame here. We are finished." The word finished landed heavier than the rain. Mira's fingers slid off the handle, leaving a faint smear of water and panic. She looked up at the second-floor window where she used to press her forehead as a kid, watching storms and feeling safe because storms couldn't get in. The curtains twitched, then stilled. Someone was watching. Someone chose not to open the door. A suitcase thumped behind her feet. Her suitcase, the small one she kept for weekend trips. Her mother must have packed it in minutes, angry hands grabbing the first things they saw. A coat followed, thrown with enough force that it hit Mira's shoulder and fell into the puddle at her feet. The message was cruelly efficient. Take what you can carry and disappear. Mira's hair stuck to her cheeks. Her mascara, carefully applied for a dinner she'd been excited about, bled into dark crescents under her eyes. She knelt in the rain and lifted the coat, squeezing water from it as if she could wring out the moment itself. Her mouth opened again, but the door remained a silent wall. The sound of the deadbolts sliding into place was so final she flinched. She didn't remember walking away. She only remembered the cold bite of wet fabric against her skin and the way the city's noise seemed to dim, as though even the traffic was uncomfortable witnessing a girl being erased. The lie had been simple, which is what made it lethal. She had spent the last 2 months working late at the charity office downtown, coordinating donations for flood victims. It wasn't glamorous work, spreadsheets, phone calls, warehouse visits, but it mattered. For the first time in years, she felt like her choices belonged to her. She'd met Jonah there, a volunteer with charming words and ambitious eyes. He'd offered to help, to connect them with sponsors. He'd been the kind of person who knew how to smile at the right angle and say your name like it was a compliment. When the missing funds were discovered, Jonah's smile didn't falter. He looked mournful, almost heroic, when he told the board he suspected fraud and wanted it investigated. Mira, still naive enough to assume truth could defend itself, had handed over every login, every email thread, every receipt. She hadn't realized she was handing him a weapon. The next morning, screenshots leaked online, messages that looked like Mira authorizing transfers, altering numbers, reassuring someone that no one will notice, the handwriting of a digital forgery. The board panicked, sponsors threatened lawsuits, the police called. And then, as if the whole city had been waiting to pounce, the rumor slid into her family's dinner like a blade between ribs. Her father had built his reputation on propriety. Her mother lived for the approval of people who smiled at her in public and judged her in private. Their friends were the kind who used the word community as a shield and scandal as a weapon. Mira's family didn't ask questions. They asked how quickly they could bury the problem. Mira had stood in the dining room, still in her rain-damp blouse from running home, begging them to give her time. "Someone is framing me," she'd said, voice shaking. "Please, I can prove it." Her mother's eyes had stayed dry. Prove it somewhere else. Now she was somewhere else, the curb of a street that suddenly looked unfamiliar, even though she'd walked it all her life. The water pooled around her sneakers. Her suitcase wheel caught in a crack and jerked her arm every step. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't go back. She turned the corner onto a wider avenue where the rain had chased most people indoors. A bus passed, spraying her with a wave of dirty water that smelled of oil and old leaves. She stumbled and caught herself against a lamppost, pressing her forehead to the cold metal. Her breath came in sharp bursts. She tried to swallow, but grief sat in her throat like stone. A bench appeared ahead, half sheltered by a tree that didn't know how to protect anyone. Mira sat hard down, her suitcase upright beside her like a silent companion. She pulled the coat over her shoulders. The fabric smelled of home, laundry detergent, cedar from the closet, the faint perfume her mother wore. It made her chest hurt worse. She cried the way you cry when you're trying not to make noise, the sobs folding inward, shaking her ribs. Her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't want to open. Messages from acquaintances. Is it true? I'm so sorry. How could you? The group chat she'd once laughed in was now a courtroom. She turned the phone off and held it like a useless stone. Somewhere in the rain, a car moved with a different kind of sound, not the rattling of old engines or the impatient honk of commuters, but a low, controlled hum like a predator moving through tall grass. Headlights swept across the wet pavement and paused. A supercar, sleek, black, impossibly clean despite the storm, rolled to a stop at the curb in front of the bench. Mira blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. Cars like that belonged in glossy ads, not on a soaked street with a girl who'd just been thrown away. The driver door opened, warm interior light spilled out onto the rain like spilled honey. A man, tall and composed in a dark coat that looked tailored to defy weather, stepped out. The rain hit him and seemed to decide it didn't have permission to make him look messy. He moved with the calm of someone used to storms, literal and otherwise. He walked towards Mira without hesitation, shoes splashing lightly in puddles. His face was half-shadowed by the street lamp, but she recognized him anyway because the city had plastered him everywhere for years. Magazine covers, charity galas, business articles, the occasional gossip blog. Adrian Vale, the wealthiest man in the city, founder of Vale Holdings, the kind of billionaire whose name was said with a mixture of admiration and resentment, like a myth people argued about. Mira's first thought was irrational. Of course the universe would send someone who belonged to another world to witness her humiliation. Adrian stopped a few feet away, gaze scanning her quickly, not in judgment but in assessment, like someone checks for injuries. "You're soaked," he said. His voice was low, steady, cutting clean through the rain's noise. Mira pulled the coat tighter. "I'm fine." "You're shivering." "I said I'm fine." The words came out sharper than she intended, a reflexive defense against pity. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled, and the movement made her dizzy. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't smile condescendingly. He simply reached into his coat and took out an umbrella, black, simple, expensive in its understatement. He opened it with a soft click and held it over her. The rain instantly softened to a distant hiss. Mira looked up, startled by the small human kindness. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes met hers, gray in the streetlight, focused like he'd made a decision long before stepping out of the car. "Because you're sitting on a bench in a storm with a suitcase and a face that says you didn't choose this." Mira's laugh was bitter. "Everyone seems to think I chose it." "Not everyone," he said, and the simplicity of it made her throat burn. She tried to remember what she'd heard about him. Ruthless in business, private, a man who didn't waste time. This, stopping for a stranger, didn't fit the story people told. "I don't need rescuing," she muttered, though her body betrayed her with another shiver. "I'm not offering rescue," Adrian replied. "I'm offering a ride, and a dry place for the next hour. You can decide what you need after you stop shaking." Mira hesitated. Every warning her mother drilled in her mind flared in her mind. Don't accept favors. Don't look desperate. Desperation makes you cheap. But she was already cheap in the eyes of her family, thrown out like an unwanted receipt, and the rain didn't care about pride. Adrian glanced at her suitcase. "Where are you going?" "I don't know." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. Something in Adrian's expression tightened, not with judgment but with something like anger, directed outward, at an unseen source. "Then come," he said, voice firm but not forceful, "at least until you figure out your next step." Mira stared at him, trying to detect the angle. People with power rarely did anything without a reason. "What's the catch?" she asked. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "No catch. If you want to step out of the car in 5 minutes, you can. If you want me to drop you at a shelter or a hotel, I will. If you want silence, you'll get silence." Her hands trembled around the edge of the coat. She imagined opening the car door and stepping into warmth. She imagined a seat that didn't seep cold into her bones. She imagined, for one moment, not having to decide everything while drowning in rain. Mira stood slowly. Adrian reached for her suitcase without asking, lifting it with effortless ease and placing it by the car. He opened the passenger door, gesturing for her to get in first. The interior smelled faintly of leather and clean air, like a place where chaos wasn't allowed. She slid into... Mira didn't sleep so much as drift in and out of shallow darkness, waking whenever the wind slapped rain against the glass. Each time she opened her eyes, the room was still there, soft light in the hallway, thick curtains, the steady tick of a clock. It felt unreal, like she'd stepped into a story that belonged to someone else. Yet the ache in her chest was stubbornly real, and so was the humiliation that replayed in flashes. Her mother's face, her father's voice, the deadbolt sliding into place. At dawn, the storm eased into a fine, persistent drizzle. The city beyond the windows looked washed clean, as if it could pretend nothing ugly had happened. A gentle knock pulled Mira upright. The housekeeper from the night before, Grace, entered with a tray of coffee and toast. "Mr. Vale asked me to check on you," she said kindly, keeping her eyes on the tray rather than Mira's swollen face. "He's in his study when you're ready." Mira's throat tightened. "Thank you." Grace hesitated, then added softly, "You're not the first person to come through this house in a storm, but you're the first one I've seen look like you still want to live afterward. Hold on to that." When Grace left, Mira sat with the coffee warming her hands and tried to steady her breathing. Adrian had offered help, not vague comfort, help with teeth. But taking it meant stepping into a world of contracts and power, a world where people like Jonah thrived. It also meant admitting she couldn't fix this alone. She showered again, dressed in the borrowed clothes, and followed the hallway down to a set of double doors. The study smelled of paper, leather, and something faintly smoky, like old firewood. Adrian stood at a wall of windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a voice Mira hadn't heard last night. Colder, sharper, the sound of someone used to making problems disappear. "I don't care who he knows. If the data shows unauthorized access, I want the digital trail preserved, and I want it done without a whisper to the board. If anyone leaks, they're fired. Understood?" He ended the call and turned. The hardness in his face softened slightly when he saw her. "Good morning." Mira's voice cracked. "Morning." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, the same respectful distance as last night. "Did you eat?" "A little." "That's something." He sat, opened a laptop, and pulled up a timeline on the screen. "I don't want to overwhelm you, so we'll keep this simple. Last night I had my security team, digital security, analyze the charity's account activity. Your login credentials were used, but not from your devices." Mira's stomach clenched. "So someone stole my password? Or copied it, or used a session token? There are several ways," he said, eyes on the screen. "What matters is this. The access came from 2 locations. One is a co-working space downtown, the other is a hotel suite booked under an alias paid for with a corporate card that links back to a shell company." Mira's mouth dried. "Jonah, he works from that co-working space." Adrian nodded. "It gets better. The shell company is connected to a man named Victor Sloan." The name hit Mira like a gust of cold. Victor Sloan wasn't just some shady businessman. He was the kind of figure people mentioned in whispers, an investor known for acquiring companies through pressure, scandals, and forced resignations. Mira had seen his face once, on a news segment about aggressive corporate tactics. She remembered his smile, thin, satisfied, predatory. "What does he have to do with a charity?" Mira asked, voice unsteady. Adrian's gaze sharpened. The charity sits on a piece of property near the river. The lease is old and cheap, and redevelopment plans have been blocked because the charity refuses to move. If the charity collapses in scandal, the property becomes available. Mira stared at him. So I was collateral? You were the scapegoat, Adrian corrected. A clean one, young, idealistic, and, he paused, from a family that cares about appearances more than truth. The words stung because they were accurate. Mira swallowed. Why are you telling me this? Why not just expose Jonah? We will, Adrian said, but we need to do it right. If we move too fast, Sloan will bury evidence and paint it as a misunderstanding. The board will still blame you to protect themselves. He folded his hands. We're going to build a case that doesn't rely on anyone's goodwill. Mira's hands tightened in her lap. What do you need from me? Adrian's eyes flicked to her, and his voice softened slightly. The truth, in detail. Every interaction with Jonah, every password you shared, every device you used, every moment you felt something was off. Mira closed her eyes, forcing herself to sift through memories she'd tried to shove into a corner. He offered to help set up my laptop once. He said my antivirus was outdated. He installed something. I didn't think. Adrian didn't scold her. That's enough. That's your entry point. We can retrieve the software logs. Mira's breath came out shaky. And my family? Adrian's expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to cool. Your family can wait. Right now, we handle the thing trying to ruin you. Mira looked at him, really looked. The billionaire in front of her wasn't the glossy magazine myth. He was composed, yes, and powerful, yes, but there was something else, a precise, controlled fury that felt personal. When he talked about lies and scapegoats, it wasn't theory, it was memory. You said your sister, Mira murmured. What happened to her? Adrian's jaw tightened. He stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down a framed photo. He didn't bring it to Mira immediately. He looked at it first, as if bracing himself. Then he set it on the desk between them. The woman in the photo was laughing, mid-turn, hair caught by sunlight. She looked alive in a way that made Mira's chest ache. Her name was Ilara, Adrian said quietly. She worked for a company Sloan wanted. She found proof of wrongdoing. They turned it on her, made her look corrupt. Her own friends believed it. Her father believed it. Mira's throat tightened. What happened? Adrian's gaze went distant. She stopped fighting. She thought no one would listen. She left the city, and one winter night she drove off a bridge. His voice remained calm, but it was the calm of someone standing over a grave. It was ruled an accident. I never believed that. But by the time I had enough power to investigate, the trail was cold. Mira's hands rose to her mouth, horrified. I'm so sorry. Adrian's eyes flicked to her. Don't be sorry, be angry. Stay angry enough to survive. Mira stared at the photo again and felt something shift inside her. Her pain, which had been an inward collapse, began to turn outward into focus. So you want to take Sloan down, she said, voice unsteady. I want to stop him, Adrian replied. If we can take him down, that's a bonus. He slid the photo back and closed the folder. But first, we clear your name. The next 48 hours turned Mira's life into a controlled storm. Adrian moved with quiet efficiency. A lawyer arrived, Renee Park, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of woman who could dismantle a liar without raising her voice. A cybersecurity specialist followed, carrying equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. They took Mira's laptop, phone, and every device she'd used at work. They pulled data she didn't know existed, login timestamps, IP addresses, deleted files, hidden remote access software. Mira sat in Adrian's kitchen with Grace's tea and listened as professionals spoke in terms she barely understood, but the verdict became clearer by the hour. Jonah had planted access tools on Mira's laptop. He'd drafted fake emails, routed transactions through her credentials, and created a trail meant to be convincing to people who wanted a quick culprit. The board had helped by being lazy and afraid. On the third day, Renee placed a printed report in front of Mira.
"This is enough to compel the police to shift focus," she said. "But we also need to manage public perception. The city already decided you're guilty. We need to give them a reason to reconsider." Mira's stomach twisted. Press? Adrian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Not a spectacle," he said. "A controlled release. Evidence, not emotion." Mira stared down at the report. "They'll still hate me." "Some will," Adrian admitted, "but truth is stubborn. It survives long enough to outlast gossip." That afternoon, Adrian drove Mira to a small office downtown, quiet, secure, no signage. Inside, a private investigator played surveillance footage from the co-working space. Mira watched Jonah on screen, laughing with someone she didn't recognize, then slipping into a back room with a laptop bag. Timestamps matched the unauthorized access. She felt sick. "He looked me in the eyes," she whispered. "He said he was helping." "He helped himself," Adrian said. Renee's team arranged a meeting with the police. Mira sat across from an officer who'd called her 2 nights ago with a tone that assumed guilt. Now his expression had shifted into wary attention as the evidence slid across the table like a blade. "This is substantial," the officer muttered. "We'll need to bring him in." "You'll need to bring in more than him," Renee said evenly, "because Jonah is a tool. Tools have hands." The officer's gaze flicked to Adrian, recognition dawning. "Mr. Vale," the officer said carefully, "are you involved in this?" Adrian's smile was thin. "I'm involved in ensuring an innocent woman doesn't get crushed because it's convenient." The police left with the evidence. Mira walked out into a city that didn't know yet it was about to be wrong. That night, Adrian sat with Mira in the quiet